right, welcome everyone to our continuing Advanced OpenAir webinar series. Today's topic is subcontractor management and the variety of ways this can be done in OpenAir. There is no silver bullet. I'll just warn you in advance that there's a perfect way to do subcontract management. It really is driven by the needs of your organization and how dynamic your subcontractor needs are within the organization. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jody Seasai. I'm with Top Step Consulting, and we focus on business optimization and efficiencies for those of you in the OpenAir user community. So we're real happy to have you join us and talk about the OpenAir webinar series with us. As I continue on with the presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the phone lines muted, and at the end of the presentation I'll leave some time for Q&A if anyone has any questions. Of course, if you want to always ask questions along the way, I'll keep an eye on that chat window that's available in the Ready Talk session and try to answer questions along the way that may come up, or at least answer them at the end of the presentation. So, here's a basic definition for what is subcontractor management, a term that's not in Webster's dictionary. So, of course, it's whatever it means for your company. But it's really the act of managing those external resources that are not technically employees. And how does those external resources impact the budget of your project and the cost of your project so that you can understand where your profitability how your profitability is impacted and what kind of financial liabilities you may have, such as cost accruals for those commitments to pay external resources as you use them. So OpenAir does provide a lot of features, and everyone on this call probably does have something in place right now to do subcontractor management, and it's really a matter of kind of hearing what else is out there and then kind of sitting back and say, do I have the right one in place, or maybe I need to use a combination, or maybe I need to tweak the way I'm doing it to add a few more tracking fields or to define a streamlined process as far as ownership or reporting of those subcontractors. So that's what we're going to try and do today, is go through 3 basic approaches that are available within the OpenAir system. But there's 3 basic approaches available in OpenAir around subcontractor handling, and it comes down to cost tracking and what's the most effective and efficient way for you to do cost tracking. So if you think in terms of cost tracking, there's of course expense reports and the expense module. And many of you may actually be using the subcontractor tracking through the expense module. And we'll go through some of those features. Go ahead on the chat window. The next area is purchase items, which is an area that actually does require, with the licensing scheme within OpenAir, that may require that you do have a licensing change of your software. But it is a whole separate module that you may or may not have access to in your organization. And the purchase item module actually has 2 aspects to it. There's sort of full PO issuing, request, approval, procurement functionality, and then there's also something called a quick PO. And we'll kind of cover the differences of those and what I'm seeing trending in the user community space. So if you're using purchases, I really would love to hear, yes, we're actually using the purchases module, because I'm seeing an uptake of this module in quite a few instances of the OpenAir system. The third area, which leverages a feature that for those of you who have talked to me in the past, you've heard me mention this feature, the time entry feature. So the third option actually does provide a subcontractor tracking mechanism using timesheets as well, and uses one of my favorite features, the time entry tab. So we'll cover that as well. Okay? So those are the 3 basic approaches, because all of those approaches do in some respect capture cost against projects. And you may find that a combination of approaches works for you, but there are cautions if you are considering a combination approach. Because if you try to do perhaps expenses and purchase items, each of those are adding cost to a project, so you want to be careful not to duplicate cost by accident. Go from nothing to duplicate would almost be worse than probably sticking with nothing. So we're going to go through each of these approaches as a topic area, and then I'm going to kind of go through and what if we mix and match? What do we have to watch out for so that you have something to take away from this as you look at your own system? So the expense item approach. This is the most basic approach for subcontractor management, and really what it is sort of treating a subcontractor as just an expense, similar to taking the team out for lunch or going on an airfare or paying for your cell phone. It's really a cost against the project. And as you know, with the expense module and the receipts that you can put on expense reports, those can also be rebilled to customers. So subcontractor expenses are potentially something you do a pass-through with a markup, for example, or just a straight pass-through, depending on the relationship with the subcontractor and the nature of your project. Okay? When I work with customers that really just want to start simple, the expense item approach is the simplest way to do things. And it does work with those of you who may have the professional version of NetSuite OpenAir licensing. Okay. So how do you do the subcontractor piece? Well, first you have to have an expense item that you can put on receipts called subcontractor expense. And once you have that in there, that's sort of just a cost capture against projects, just like all the other receipts that you can put in a project against in the system. Okay. Another thing that you can add, though, that would make it a nice tracking and reporting feature is to add the vendor field to receipts. A vendor field is something that comes naturally, natively on the receipts form. If you look in your settings form for configuration of the system, you will see, hide or show the vendor drop down on receipts. So you would just expose that and complete or populate a list of vendors in the system so that that vendor list can be in the drop down. What that gives you is a generic way to record the cost while still associating it to a specific vendor, for example. And then you may even take that to the next level and say, but this receipt is directly related to vendor invoice number 1724, and create maybe a custom field on the receipt that says, this is required if it's a subcontractor expense, and I need to fill it in with the vendor invoice number as a reference. Okay? So also knowing that it's an expense item, for those of you who deal with billing rules, you'll remember that the expense billing rule has a filter on it that says the following expense items can be passed on to the customer, and you can filter what is valid to pass to the customer and what is not valid. Okay, and here maybe you don't want subcontractor expense to be rebilled. Maybe you've compensated things in a different way to the customer. So what are the positives in taking this simplistic approach? Well, it is that. It is the simplest way to cost track subcontractor expenses in the system. It does not require the subcontractor to have an account or a user license in the system, because the way you can approach it is the person who's receiving the vendor invoice, accounts payable for example, maybe they're the ones that are solely responsible for keying in those vendor invoice costs as expense items in the system. So all vendor costs actually are associated to their user ID, their name, but you also have the vendor on the receipt to track it. Okay? As you enter the expense item into the system, that expense item, of course, is then reflected as cost against the projects through the financial analysis or overview tab, as well as any of the custom reports or reports that you've written for the system. Okay? But what are the cons? And then allow vendor-based cost reporting. So what are the negatives, however? Okay? So if you actually rebill that vendor invoice, the challenge you'll have is if your invoice layout has something like the username and then the item, the expense item, it's going to come across as the person who submitted the expense item. So it would be your project administrator, your accounts payable person, whoever is the person who entered the expense. That's the name that's going to get associated with that activity. And you may not want that showing up in an invoice, so you're sort of challenged then on how best to reflect that on an invoice with a standard layout. You can't really forecast this. There's ways to do forecasting. If you've listened to our forecasting webinar that was a few webinars back and still available for your listening pleasure, if you'd like. You can't really forecast, but there's a way to work around that using your forecast methodology with assignments or bookings and treating hours as dollars type thing. But really there is no nice way to do forecasting with this methodology. And there's really no cost accrual, because the only time the cost gets in the system is when the actual cost comes in on a piece of paper or an email from a vendor saying this is how much I'm invoicing you. So you're sort of, you don't, from a financial perspective, you're not sure what's outstanding for payment. Okay. So let's move on to, I call this the next level, which is the purchase item approach. And the purchase item approach leverages the purchases module. Okay, so some of you on the phone call may not have access to the purchases module. I believe that comes with the enterprise edition of OpenAir, but I'm sure if you, after this call, are interested in finding out what kind of impact that would have on your licensing scheme, you are more than welcome to contact your sales guy and see what kind of investment that would be. So the purchases module actually allows you to do, if you'd like, full procurement processing from within OpenAir. And when I mean full procurement processing, I mean somebody is requesting permission to purchase something against a vendor, and that request is then reviewed perhaps by somebody in finance or the procurement office. And when they approve that, then they issue a vendor purchase order through OpenAir. And that vendor purchase order then has a quantity and an amount of what the purchase is that is approved to spend on a vendor. And as the vendor invoices the company for work performed, you can fulfill that purchase order, and that would incur cost against the project. Okay? So that is a much more involved process, obviously, even as I mentioned it. Think in terms of, we just talked about expense reports. I create an expense report, I submit it as the accounts payable person, maybe the project manager reviews and approves, but there's really no one else involved. A purchase request involves the creation of a purchase request, the submission of that, perhaps the review of that by another person or procurement. Procurement then creates a purchase order to actually complete the process, and then tracks the fulfillment of that process. So when the fulfillment is tracked, that's handled by when the vendor invoices you in the company. Okay? Now there is a billing rule in the system called the purchase billing rule, the product billing rule. That is directly tied to these purchase item elements. And those can be rebilled just like expenses can, and they also support a markup capability. So from a rebill perspective, the expenses and the purchases are almost identical in their capabilities. So what does it take to set up the ability to use this purchase item approach? You do have to define your vendors, but you would have had to do that in the expenses anyway if you wanted to link to vendors. You do have to identify people who are allowed to create purchase orders. That is a granted permission in the system. And then there's a series of just setup items that, if you want to use full-blown procurement and understand where the shipping and the carriers are, and the freight on board locations for loading trains and such, you can build all that out. But in general, I see a lot of customers, they don't really need to use any of that functionality. They'll just set up a placeholder to fulfill the need that OpenAir requires you to have at least one of these values, and they'll put the word general in there just to force it to have a value. Okay? So that seems like a lot of setup. But then there's also something called a quick PO. So before I kind of show you the quick PO, which actually is quite a nice feature, I'm going to take a step back and show you what the purchase request, purchase order process looks like. I'm going to make an assumption that everyone on the call has done expense reports at some point in time in the system. It's a pretty common use of the system. But at the end, if you'd like, and you'd like me to walk through the expense piece of it, I can. All right. But I'm going to go into my purchases module, and I'm going to create a purchase request and just show you what the full-blown process is. And then we're going to talk about quick POs, and you can compare and contrast the two. So I need to create a purchase request against this subcontractor handling. I really need this person by the 24th, and I need a good hamburger place. And I'm going to create this purchase request. What it does, similar to an expense report, it that was the header or the envelope, and now I need to put the purchase request items in here, similar to receipts on the expense report. And so I say, okay, I need external services, subcontractor services, and there are some values like manufacturer and FOB locations, all that stuff that is required to be set up, but I've hidden them all in my form because I don't really need them. I just need to have a value that exists. And then I'm going to pick the vendor, and I said I really need a Five Guys hamburger for my cool hamburger place. Okay. And then I'm going to need about 15 of those hamburgers at a price of $8.50 a piece. Okay. And then I'm going to save this request item. And so what I've done is I've actually created a purchase request. And if I view that purchase request, you can see here it only has one expense item in it, which is the 15 hamburgers that I need. Okay. And then I'm going to have to submit and approve that just like you do with expense reports. What happens, similar to expense reports, it's been routed to someone for approval. In this case, I made it self-approve. But now a procurement person who has permissions to create POs comes in and actually creates new PO by vendor and says, okay, well there's a Five Guys vendor in there. I'm going to go ahead and issue a purchase order to go ahead and procure these 15 items. Okay, so I create purchase order 9. I also need to submit and approve that through an approval process because you may have another internal procurement process to follow, but I'm going to go ahead and self-approve that. And so here's my lovely PO. And here's those FOB basic values that I didn't bother even setting. I just needed to have values in the system. And then the process is fulfillment. So I look at the outstanding POs that I have. And here I can see that I have a total quantity that I want to buy of 15, but I have not actually purchased any yet. I haven't been invoiced for any yet. And as the invoice come in, and Five Guys says, okay, well today you bought 5, so I'm going to invoice you for 5. I click on the PO and I say, 5 have been fulfilled. I click Next. And here's one of those fields that have to have a value in it. Invoice number 1576. Create fulfillment. Okay. So what that does is I've actually said I want 15 hamburgers. I've been invoiced for 5. I still have 10 more that I'm agreeing to purchase. And now what happens in the system, let me just show you the whole process behind, or the purpose behind that fulfillment process. Is if I go into the subcontractor handling and I go into the analysis tab. Okay. Some of you may or may not have this turned on, just to let you know. But this is a standard report that comes on the stages you can activate in your stage configuration. But you can see here I have purchase items from purchases. I have one fulfillment that has been recorded, and it's for $42.50, which is 5 of those hamburgers at $8.50 a piece. Okay. So if I turned around and tried to, I could rebill that to a customer because I have one fulfillment record, which even though there's 5 items in it, it's sort of the same as saying I'm invoicing one receipt that says I purchased 10 notebooks. Okay. So this is the cost now against the project, but you'll notice it's only $42.50. It's not the full 15 hamburgers at $8.50 a piece. Okay, it's only the amount that has been invoiced to me, so that's when the cost hits the project. Okay. Unlike expenses, the minute you put an expense report in the system, all the cost of that expense hits the project. Okay. So after I showed you that, you're probably thinking, wow, that seems like a lot of overhead just to track a vendor purchase order stuff. I already have Great Plains or NetSuite or SAP that does my procurement. I really don't need all of that overhead. Let me introduce you to the quick PO process. So a quick PO actually is a one-page form. No submit approval. It's strictly create it, creates cost against the project. It's even simpler actually than the expense report approach. So it's entered directly by the person who's getting the invoice from the customer, from the vendor. And as they create this record, it puts the cost against the project. Now the unfortunate thing is with quick POs, since there's no known agreement to purchase, we don't know how much we've committed to purchasing. All that we know is we're recording cost and actual. So we're sort of back to the expense report con that we have, which is if I use a quick PO, I'm only recording actuals as the invoices come in. But I'm going to show you how simple this is to actually put this in the system. And I know what you're saying as I flip through these screens. Boy, she's going really fast. Well, we do record these and make these available, so you're more than welcome to review this section of the webinar over and over again to make sure that you understand what I'm trying to do here. So unlike the purchase request drop-down and then doing a purchase order, there's actually a very, very short method to this, and it's called a new quick PO item. So if I select that new quick PO item, I get a simple form, and you'll notice it's a purchase item form. So it's sort of like a single receipt or a single item. Okay. What's the date? I'm going to put my project in there. What am I purchasing? I'm going to say external services. Now I'm going to try this Don't Panic vendor. I'm going to buy 10 things at a price of $100 a piece. And maybe these are stoves. And I'm going to save this. Okay. Just the fact I did those few fields, project, product, vendor, cost, save, that's it. I don't need to submit it. I've actually created something that's cost directly against the project. And if I look at the list of purchase items, you're going to find that quick PO in here. It doesn't get a PO number because it's called a quick PO. It's really just a cost record. It's sort of like, for those of you who may be in accounting or working with accounting, it's almost like a journal entry of cost, it seems like. But now we're going to go back to the project, and you're going to see how this impacted the cost of the project. So remember, it was $42.50. Okay. Well, now I have 2 items that are ready to be billed, and there's a total of $1,000 for $42.50 because I had purchased 10 stoves at $100 a piece. That's $1,000, so it just bang hit the cost of the project the minute I saved that form. So that really, although I said expense reports are the most simplest, easiest way to put stuff in the system, quick POs are even easier, but the dependency is you have to have the purchases module. Okay. So the purchase request setup tip, if you have to go through the formal process with getting approval from everyone to say that yes, we can buy 15 hamburgers, we're just going to buy them 5 at a time, then the setup tip, if you go through that full-blown procurement process, is that make sure the quantity reflects the number of things you are purchasing. If it's services, maybe it's the number of hours. If it's hamburgers, it's the number of hamburgers. If it's the number of notebooks, training notebooks from a vendor, it's the number of notebooks. So the tip, and especially for those hourly contractors, the quantity really should reflect the hours, because as you get an invoice from the customer for the vendor, the invoice is going to say, we are now invoicing you for 27 hours, and you need a way to say, okay, I need 27 of each of those units. Okay. And if it's fixed fee, maybe they say we're going to invoice you every month $5,000. So then the quantity would be the number of months, because you're expecting invoices to come in 1 month at a time. So you're purchasing 1 month at a time. So those are the tips if you're doing the full-blown. But you'll notice that when I did the quick PO, since the cost hits the project directly, the quantity is really not, I could leave it as 1 and just put the total cost of the item in there. So let's go through the pros and the cons, because the interesting thing is the purchase item, because it has the 2 different approaches, is really kind of a mixed bag on the pros and the cons. So the pros are the costs are still captured against the project. If you're using the full procurement process with the PO issuing, then you're able to also track the accruals of how much you've committed to pay the vendor versus how much you have paid because you're using the fulfillment process. Okay. The costs only hit the project when you get invoiced or when the fulfillment is put in. Okay. And then of course with quick POs, the minute you create them, that's basically a fulfillment, and it goes as cost against the project. Okay. Again, no user license required for the subcontractor. We're using vendor fields and vendor capabilities to track the cost and the accrual for that activity. And it does support vendor-based cost reporting, just like the expense one does with vendor being on the receipt. Oh, and then, of course, because the forms are so flexible, you can hide a lot of the fields that you don't really care about, like that manufacturer field. I've used that occasionally, but for the most part, people hide it. So what are the downsides of the purchases approach? Again, you still don't have that forecast capability. You still don't have that, that forward thinking. You can forecast cost accrual, but you don't know when the cost is going to come in. Okay. It does require that you have the purchase module, and if you're using the full vendor request PO process, you have to set up all those items and identify who's going to be allowed to create POs, along with approval processes and everything like that. And as it does require that as vendor invoices come in, someone is responsible for filling those POs. Okay. So there's two approaches: the expense report, pretty straightforward, purchase request, a real robust version, a real simple version, and now the third approach is timesheets. Okay, and the timesheet approach is really reserved for your subcontractors that are mostly hourly, so that you have some kind of hours to reconcile with vendor invoices. So the timesheet approach is using the timesheet module, and it's really the subcontractor is using a license. The person is logging into the system. And we'll share some tips with you on how to minimize the number of licenses you're having to burn, because not everyone is a full-time subcontractor. You may use them one day a month. Do they have to actually hold on to a license all month long if they're really just going to be used for one day? So there's some suggestions there. But you're using a full, you set up the subcontractor and you use them as a full resource. You use them on task assignments and resource bookings, and everywhere that you use an employee, you use the subcontractors. So you basically treat them as part of your team, right? They should also receive late timesheet notices, just like everyone else, because they have to put timesheets in the system. That's why you set them up as a user in the system. Okay? The key to this timesheet approach, though, is turning on a feature that you hopefully have activated. If you don't, contact OpenAir support, and it's called the Time Entry tab, and we're definitely going to show that, because it allows you to track how many hours the vendor has actually invoiced you versus the hours they've recorded in your system. So you're going to see that in a second here. So the Time Entry tab is a tab that shows up right next to that Timesheets tab, and that Time Entry tab basically turns a timesheet inside out and breaks everything down into minute detail for everyone, not just your subcontractors, for everyone. So it's actually a great feature to use for timesheet lookup regardless. You don't have to fiddle around with detailed reports and filters and all that kind of stuff. You can just use list views and column filters and things like that to find data quickly in the system. But for subcontractors primarily, you would click on the time entries and you would select the subcontractor and find out how many hours have they worked, on what projects have they worked. Okay? And there's some setup items that are available, features that complement this time entry tab called status fields that you can set up, as well as some notes. And really, this feature that OpenAir came up with was originally intended to do vendor invoice reconciliation. And how do you do that? So the subcontractor is putting their time in the system, la-di-da-di-da, and you get an invoice in the door. And the invoice says, invoice for the work performed in June, 72 hours. Okay. So you take that invoice and you go to your Time Entries tab and you filter on the date for the month of June, and the person who's working on, works for that vendor. And you literally look at the hours and see, do they total up 72 hours? And if they don't, then the fun begins. How do you find out where the mismatch is? Maybe you call up the vendor to say, hey, can you give me a detailed time list because it's not reconciling to my records for the month of June. But if they do reconcile, then you can actually use this run in action feature, which is check boxes in the little blue gear. And by checking on those items that reconcile, clicking that blue gear, you get the option to tag those time entries as the example here shows, we've received the vendor invoice, okay? And maybe what the invoice number is and the date you received it, for example. So you're tagging the fact that I've received invoices, or we've been invoiced for this much work already, okay? And then anything that doesn't reconcile is left standing open, which then implies a cost accrual because they've done the work but they haven't invoiced you yet. Okay? So I'll show that in my system really quick because I use that actually for my subcontractors. So if you go into the Time Entries tab of the Timesheets module, and because it turns everything inside out on a timesheet, everything's here. Client, project, task information, dates, hours, notes, descriptions, the status of the timesheet. So you're not just looking at approved information, you're looking at everything. Okay? So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say I need to filter this based on my admin team person, who happens to be an outsourced administrator that I use. And I am going to look at what has been done in the month of May. Okay. So my admin outsourced person for the month of May has worked a total of 7 hours. All those timesheets have been approved, and here's the different activities that they've worked on. So I'm going to say, you know what, I haven't reconciled that, which means to me I have not received an invoice. So I'm expecting to pay this person for the work that's been performed in the month of May. When I do receive the invoice, I turn around and say, oh, yep, the 7 hours match. So I'm going to go ahead and mark, I call mine reconciled versus status, but I can mark it as invoiced and say the invoice number is 555. Okay, great. Now my finance team will look at this saying, okay, yep, we've received the invoice, and when they issue the payment to the vendor, they also could come in, if you'd like, and use this more as a workflow, kind of a confirmation thing as well, and say, you know what, not only did we receive the invoice, we confirm we received the invoice, and we have paid it. So the vendor invoice was 555. Our check number was 101089. And hit OK. So now from a reporting perspective, I know what has been worked, so from a cost accrual perspective. I know what's been invoiced but maybe not paid yet, and now I also know what's been paid. So I sort of know all 3 areas. Work that we've committed to pay, work that we still need to pay because we've been invoiced, and what has actually been paid. And all of that by just using these features in the Time Entry tab. Now, one thing that you may want to think about in the user setup situation is many times you'll find yourself wanting to pull reports to say, I just want my subcontractor time. Now the challenge is if you create them like every other employee in the system, you're really not going to be able to tell unless you know their name and you filter by resource name is on reports if they're a subcontractor or not. So that can be a little tedious, especially if you're dealing with a lot of subcontractors. So an approach that you could take is to set up a custom field. And we definitely think this is a best practice for anyone who's using subcontractors and employees. And this employee type field, this custom field, allows you to track whether the person is an employee or a subcontractor, and that becomes a filter available on reports. I also take it one step further and recommend that you add an employee active and an employee inactive option so that you can pull information on just active employees or all employees or just inactive employees, and the same for subcontractors. Why the inactive status, you may ask? There's a checkbox that says active. Why can't I just filter on that? You may have tried to find that in reports. That's not available as a filter on reports. There's a checkbox that says exclude items associated with inactive entities, but that means anything, not just like users. It could be inactive projects or cost centers or booking types, anything like that. So by just having this employee type be a simple drop-down that tracks the active and inactive status as well as that checkbox gives you much more flexibility in reporting. Okay. And subcontractors, really their purpose is obviously to do the work that you've hired them for, but you're really asking them just to put timesheets in the system. So they require a really simple setup. Just give them the timesheet module. They don't need much else. Okay. And they only need to see the projects, of course, that they're supposed to be entering time against. Okay. Additionally, if you do have a subcontractor, you may also want to track the vendor, which again, there's the vendor field in the system, so why not put that on the demographic record of the user. So not only can you track the fact that it's a subcontractor, you can tell what vendor it came across. Just one more thing to help reconcile very quickly with vendor invoice data or questions that may come in from vendors or clients, for example. So there is a cost override feature, and with using subcontractors, sometimes you're challenged with that fact of, well, I'm hiring them today to do project management, but tomorrow I'm going to hire them to do like copywriting or QA or business consulting, and the rates they're charging me are different based on the role that I'm hiring them for. So how do I deal with that cost? Because I really want accurate cost for every hour they work. Well, of course, on the user record there's a cost field, but actually there's an override feature that you can activate at the project level and even at the task level. So if they're hired to do 2 different jobs on the same project that are different costs, you can actually override their cost on the project to say, but on this project or on this task, the cost to me is 75 if they're doing copywriting. It's 105 if they're doing project management. It's $10 an hour if they're doing documentation. Just whatever the charge is that's variable based on their role or activity, you can do that with the cost override features. And then of course, since it attaches itself to the timesheet, you actually have the ability to record cost very accurately against your projects. Okay. For those of you who are using more than one cost rate, there is a cost table structure that allows 3 costs to be tracked against the user, not just one. The same override features are available for all 3 levels. So it gives you lots of combination permutations of things to keep track of in the system. So what are the pros with this timesheet approach? Of course, the costs are captured against the project as timesheets put in. So as work is delivered, you're sort of proactively capturing that cost. The nice thing is you'll have cost accrual because you'll know the work's been delivered. You just haven't paid for it yet. So you know that there's an outstanding financial liability on your books by reporting on timesheet entries even. And it's vendor-based. You can support vendor-based cost reporting if you add that vendor field to the user. But probably the number one thing that's not available in the other 2 approaches is the ability to forecast now. So now you can forecast costs because you've got the subcontractor as a person in the system. So you can forecast how many hours you want them to work. And those want or hours, like the assigned or booking hours, those all can have a cost as well because they respect the cost values and the override values on the objects that they're related to. So now you have a forecasting capability. So this sort of is the most robust approach. The challenge here is you have to have hourly subcontractors, and some of you on the phone just don't ever deal with them. They're mostly fixed price situation, and for those fixed price people, the purchase or the expense item may be much more realistic for you to use. Okay. You may also have the now with the fact that you have the subcontractor as a user in the system, that name now becomes associated with the stuff that is in the system. So that invoice layout challenge we had with the expense report goes away because now we actually have a subcontractor name that we can display on the invoice so that you don't have to worry about, well, I don't want my accounts payable default person, Jane Doe, to be showing up. I want, John Smith to be showing up instead. Now, of course, there has to be a downside. Like I said at the beginning of the call, there's no silver bullet to any of this. So you do have to use a user license for the subcontractor. But if you happen to use the same type of company, like Computer Associates, for example, consider using a single license to represent all of their people, and then require that in the description of the time entry notes they indicate who it was that did the work, for example. So you can kind of cut down on license usage a little bit that way. Okay. Also, although this timesheet entry makes it very streamlined to reconcile vendor invoice amounts and hours, think about the cost of that license versus how much that subcontractor is costing you. Okay? I had a conversation with a customer where they were considering, well, we're just going to use this for our offshore resources. And the offshore resources were some very, very low rate, like $15, $20 an hour for QA, for example. But the cost of the license was another uptick of $20 a person or something like that. So it would have doubled the cost of the subcontractors, which essentially removes the benefit of using the offshore resources. So is that really effective? Can you just go back to using the purchases or the expenses? So that's the only trade-off there I'd want you to consider before you start creating a bunch of licenses in the system. Okay. And to make sure that the subcontractors are remembering to put the timesheets in the system, it's a good thing that they get included with the late timesheet alerts. However, if you're not using them every week, you sort of have to remember to go and turn off the fact that they should get the alert. So that's usually controlled by the timesheet required checkbox on the user demographic. So you'd have to kind of continually flip that on, flip that off, flip that on, flip that off. So do they always get it or do they never get it is almost a decision that you have to make. Okay. So quickly let's go through the combining approaches option. So what if I combined timesheet and the purchase combination? What would my challenges be? So it may, you may need to use purchase requests, and it may meet the needs of accounting, but the thing that you have to make sure that you don't duplicate is the purchases are meant to capture cost, period. So use the purchase to capture cost, but then the timesheets to capture hours only, which means the cost of those resources, their hourly cost or the cost overrides on the projects are all zero. You have to make sure the value of those hours are zero. Otherwise, you're going to start double costing things against projects, and your margin is going to look terrible for using those subcontractors. So if you choose to use the timesheets with the purchases because it meets the best of both worlds, make sure timesheet, like the value of those hours, are zero, and the purchase controls the cost. What if I combine timesheets and expenses? You've got the same exact thing, right? So you can definitely do the hours, but make sure the cost is zero on those hours because the expense is what's going to actually handle the cost in the item. Okay? And last, what if you combine expenses and purchases together? That's great, but make sure that you're not having an expense report and a purchase or like a quick PO or something against the same person for the same effort. This is sort of just coordination. Decide how you're going to capture that vendor invoice. Is it going to be a purchase order or is it going to be an expense report for actual cost? So the expense and purchase order combination is almost rare, I think, because logically you would probably dedicate purchases to subcontractors and not deal with the expense piece at all. And then for those of you who want to live dangerously and combine all three, well, I'm not really recommending that because there's a lot to keep track of, especially when it comes to reporting. Because when you pull that old, tell me what the projected cost of my project is, are you really going to have a good feel for what that is or what the actual cost is of your project? It may require a lot of validation on that report to make sure that you're pulling information the way you expect to. So before I open up the phone lines for some questions on the topic, I just wanted to thank you all for coming very much, and let you know that on our website, of course you registered through our website to come to the webinar, but we do record these and post them afterwards. So please, if you've missed any of the ones previously, don't hesitate to go and watch those or listen to those, and let your colleagues know that also are interested in this topic, especially if they had conflicts today. This will be available for them to listen back to. So I definitely encourage you to go and listen and gain the information that we're able to provide to the general user community, as well as our weekly tips. We do weekly OpenAir tips. We tweet those out on Top Step Tweets, and we post them on our the LinkedIn OpenAir user group to make sure everyone's getting those little known features or options that you don't know what you don't know. So definitely feel free to subscribe that or for watching for that. And if you have any comments, questions, feedback, suggestions, I am all ears, and I would love to hear from you. You can email me direct at jcsai@topstepconsulting or use our general info@topstepconsulting.com.